always thought the worst kind of betrayal came from strangers. But I was wrong. It comes wrapped in a smile. You raised yourself, wearing the name family. It was raining that night. Not the kind of rain that dances. The kind that drips like regret. I remember the call. My bones ached from sitting too long, but when I saw the number, my heart didn't ache. It clenched. Grandpa. His voice trembled. Can you come, please? I'm at the station. I'm scared. I don't want to go home. I gripped the phone like it could fall apart if I blinked. The boy I used to carry on my shoulders, now speaking like a trapped animal. It took me 3 seconds to grab my coat. My legs don't move like they used to, but I would have crawled if I had to. The drive was quiet. No music. No words. Just windshield wipers, beating like a countdown at the station. He was curled up on the hard bench, a blanket around his shoulders, but still shivering. When he saw me, he didn't run. He just stood there, hollow-eyed. The kind of look that takes years off a child and gives them to the grandfather instead. They told me he'd been picked up wandering alone. He wouldn't say much, except, I don't want to go back there. Please, don't make me go back. I looked at the officer. He's not going back. I didn't ask questions. I didn't cry. I signed the papers, held his hand, and we walked out into the rain. At home. He sat at the table like a ghost, in a house too big for his fears. I made soup, not because I thought it would fix anything, but because warm food is a language I still speak fluently when words fail. He didn't eat much, but when I reached to touch his hand, he flinched, and in that moment, I knew. This wasn't a bad day. This was many bad days, stitched together in silence. I called my daughter that night. Her voice was clipped, too bright, too polite. You found him? Oh, thank God. He gets like that sometimes. You know how boys are. But I didn't know boys like that. And I never raised girls who ignored bruises hidden behind sleeves. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I simply walked away. The house I live in wasn't bought. It was built brick by brick, hour by hour, with hands that bled and dreams that didn't know how to give up. When I first laid the foundation, I had nothing but a second-hand shovel and a heart full of foolish hope. My wife painted the walls herself, humming lullabies she hadn't even sung to a child yet. We planted trees before we had names to give our children. That's the kind of belief we had in tomorrow. I remember laying the wooden floorboards myself. My daughter used to crawl on them, her little palms making soft slaps against the varnish. Every creak in this house is a memory. Every scratch on the wall, a story. One from when she tried to draw stars with her crayons. I never painted over them. Even when the color faded, I couldn't bring myself to erase her joy. The kitchen still smells of cinnamon sometimes, not because I bake anymore, but because the walls remember. Back then, laughter lived in the corners. The table was always full, sometimes of food, sometimes of arguments, but always of life. I built that back porch with my son. He used to call me old man, in that half-joking tone, like he was already claiming the space in my life, and maybe in my house. I laughed with him back then. I thought he was family. I thought he'd protect the boy now sleeping under my roof. How wrong I was. The boy's room used to be a guest room. We painted it together last spring, thinking we'd host some old friends more often. The paint still smells new. But now it holds a child whose nightmares don't come from fairy tales, but from real voices behind real doors. He barely speaks, but I've started to understand his silences. They sound like mine used to. I walk these halls sometimes, at night, with the lights off. Not because I like the dark, but because the house feels less empty that way. When the moonlight falls on the staircase, I almost see her, my wife standing there with folded arms, telling me the kettle's still on. She's been gone 10 years, but the echo of her footsteps lingers. The living room used to be where we danced. Yes, danced, even when the music was only in our heads. Now, it holds only dust and a television that plays the news too loud, just to drown the silence. I kept every card my daughter ever made me, every scribbled "I love you," Dad still tucked in an old shoebox. Sometimes I take them out, read them, and wonder, how does love turn into avoidance? How does "I'll always need you" become "why are you still here"? This home was once a heartbeat. Now it's a heartbeat that forgot how to echo back. It used to be filled with love. Now it only remembered me. I didn't count the hours I gave them, because back then, they weren't sacrifices. They were joys wrapped in duty. A father doesn't measure love in hours. He measures it in meals cooked, school fees paid, and shoulders offered without asking. I worked 3 jobs when my daughter was little. During the day, I was a mechanic. In the evenings, I repaired old radios. And at night, I cleaned offices after the world had already gone to sleep. My back still aches from those years, but I wore that pain like a medal, not a burden. I remember her graduation, the way she stood in that cap and gown, eyes searching the crowd until they found mine. I raised both arms like a fool, clapping harder than anyone else. That day, I wasn't tired. I was proud. Her degree hung in my house for years, until she took it with her, as she should have. But I wish she'd left the pride behind. Then her wedding, white silk, nervous laughter, her mother fixing her veil with shaking hands. I gave her away with a smile. No one noticed my fingers trembled when I let go. Maybe it was the weight of 25 years leaving my grasp in a single handshake. I gave them money when they didn't ask, and even more when they did. Down payments, loans never repaid, hospital bills, birthday parties, rent when they were between jobs. I never kept receipts. Love doesn't come with accounting. When the boy was born, my grandson, I built him a wooden cradle with my bare hands. I sanded every edge, painted it with non-toxic paint, even stitched little cloud patterns into the cushion. They said it was old-fashioned. I didn't mind. I just wanted him to sleep safe. As he grew, I read him stories at night, the same ones I told his mother. His tiny hands would grab my finger, refusing to let go until the monster in the book was defeated and the hero found home again. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being the hero. Phone calls became rare. Visits were shorter. When they came, they were in a rush, always somewhere to be, always with that clock in their eyes. My house became a checkpoint, not a destination. And then silence. Until the police station. Until the boy whispered he was afraid of home. I used to believe love meant showing up, staying late, giving more than you had, and waiting, always waiting for it to come back one day. But it didn't. Now I see that what I called love, they called convenience. What I saw as commitment, they saw as a safety net. What I thought was family was a system they learned how to use. They didn't just take what was mine. They took what I built for them. Grief has a strange way of sharpening the senses. After he came to live with me, I found myself sleeping less and thinking more. At night, I'd sit in the living room, pen in hand, notebook open, as if I could write my way to the truth. The boy never said much about what happened, but children speak in silence. His eyes always flickered toward his phone when it buzzed, but he never reached for it. He'd flinch when footsteps echoed too loud, and his smile, when it came, was cautious, like a bird afraid of its own wings. So I began to look, not loudly, not with confrontation, but with the same patience I used to teach him how to tie his shoelaces. Quiet, persistent, deliberate. It started with a drawer, an old, dusty cabinet where I used to keep the important things: property papers, tax records, insurance documents. I hadn't opened it in years. The keys were still where I left them, beneath the ceramic owl my wife once bought at a Sunday fair. Inside, I found missing pages, my will revised without my signature, documents with initials that looked like mine, but weren't quite mine, withdrawals I never made, loans I never took, a second mortgage on the house processed while I was recovering from surgery 2 years ago. I had no memory of signing anything. My pension fund bled dry in small, careful bites. Not enough to alert a bank, but enough to starve a man over time. It felt like discovering a map of every place I'd been robbed and realizing the thief lived with me once. I went to the bank. Quietly. No scene, just questions. The manager looked uncomfortable. It was authorized by your daughter. Power of attorney. We assumed you gave consent. I never did. A forged signature, a scanned ID. Everything just real enough to pass, just fake enough to ruin. I walked out of the bank and sat in my truck for what felt like hours, engine off, keys in hand. She knew I was too proud to check, too trusting to question, too tired to fight. But that's where she made her mistake, because I wasn't tired. I was just ... quiet. And quiet doesn't mean weak. I began calling old contacts. A friend from my factory days who'd become a clerk at the city records office. A neighbor's son who worked in it. I asked questions with a calm face and a cold heart. And what I learned was worse than betrayal. It was planning, premeditation. They'd been preparing for my absence while I was still alive, splitting assets, discussing what's next as if I were already dead. The boy, my grandson, was never part of the plan, just a loose end they failed to control. When I returned home that evening, I looked at him sleeping on the couch, curled up like he used to when he was small, and I felt something shift in me. Not rage. That's too loud. Not grief. That's too heavy. But resolve. They thought I was weak. They forgot who taught them strength. They say old men don't start wars, they end them. I never wanted a war. But once I knew they had planned my end, I had no choice but to rise from the ashes they were already spreading. Something changed in me after I saw those forged papers. It wasn't fury. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I became still, like a chessboard before the first move, clean, patient, and ready. I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Her name was Layla. She used to be my wife's closest friend, sharp, principled, and once a brilliant state lawyer, Before retiring to tend her roses, she had been at my daughter's wedding. She had held my grandson when he was just a day old. I hadn't seen her in over a decade. She picked up after the second ring. "Salman," she said. Her voice was older but still edged like glass. "I thought you'd forgotten about me." "Layla," I said softly, "I need your mind and your silence." She came over the next morning in a gray coat and steady shoes. "I made tea." We sat at the kitchen table and I laid it all out, the documents, the forged signatures, the missing money, the boys trembling. She read through everything without speaking, the steam from her teacup rising between us like fog over a battlefield. When she finished, she looked up at me and said, "We'll begin with the will, and we'll leave nothing undocumented this time." Over the next few weeks, I became someone I hadn't been in years. Alert, organized, deliberate. I contacted every institution I trusted, froze what accounts I could, re-registered the deeds to the house in new terms, locked down my assets behind clauses they couldn't easily break. I rewrote my will, but this time not in ink, in law. I also filed a quiet report. Nothing dramatic, nothing public, just enough to plant doubt in the systems they thought they could manipulate. Let the audit trail begin, slow and suffocating. I kept every receipt now. I photographed every form. Every call was logged, every login monitored. They didn't know I'd learned to use the technology. They thought I was too old to understand. The boy, my grandson, watched me silently. He didn't ask what I was doing, but he began sitting closer at night, eating more, sleeping longer, as if he sensed the air shifting, the roof above him growing stronger. I didn't want to punish my daughter. I wanted to remove her mask, and I would do it not with shouting or scandal, but with strategy. Because revenge, when done out of rage, is a fire that burns the house down. But revenge, done with stillness, is the wind that clears the ashes and builds something stronger. That's who I became in those weeks. Not a victim, not a broken father, but a man who remembered the weight of his own name. A man who once taught others how to walk and now remembered how to run. Revenge is loud only when done by fools. Mine would be silent. I didn't need to lift a hand. I had already planted the seeds. Now I just had to watch the harvest come in. But what they reaped was not grain, it was rot. It started with the phone calls, whispers from mutual acquaintances, vague questions laced with discomfort. "Is everything all right with your daughter? Date us. I heard her husband's business is in trouble. Something about a frozen account." I said nothing, just sipped my tea, a little longer than usual. Then came the cracks in their social image. The Facebook posts slowed down. The cheerful vacation photos vanished. The carefully curated smiles disappeared like dried petals in a drought. I imagined them sitting in their house, lights off to save electricity, wondering how their world built on my silence had begun to collapse without a sound. Their friends stopped visiting, not because of scandal, but because of distance. People sense when a storm is coming, even if the sky is still blue. I heard they tried to sell their car, the one I once helped them finance, the one they told everyone they bought with hard work. It wouldn't sell. Too many payments left, too many liens. I heard my daughter began staying up late, pacing the floors, and her husband, the self-proclaimed provider, started snapping at shadows, yelling at closed doors. That's what guilt does. It echoes louder in silence than in a courtroom. The boy never asked about them, but one night, as I tucked him in, he whispered, "Do you think they miss me?" I paused, then said, "I think they miss what they had." But they never saw what they were losing, and still, I didn't act. I didn't speak publicly. I didn't call them out. Because I didn't need to. The bank had already launched an internal review after I submitted the forged signatures. Their home equity line was frozen. Their access to credit revoked pending investigation. Not jail. Not disgrace. Just enough instability to show them what it feels like to stand on a floor that gives way. Slowly, like a mirror that doesn't shatter. Just cracks. At church, I saw them once. They walked in late and left early. Her eyes didn't meet mine. His hand never left her wrist. That told me more than any words could. I sat quietly in the back, unmoving. People forget when they turn the light off on someone. They often forget that person can still see in the dark. The boy started smiling more, drawing again, leaving his door open at night. Healing doesn't announce itself. It creeps in like the morning after a long, hard storm. I began tending my garden again, pruned the roses, fixed the gate, planted new seeds where the soil had hardened. There was something peaceful in watching new life grow beside the ruins of old illusions. I never gloated, I never celebrated. Because this wasn't revenge, this was revelation. And they never saw it coming. They thought I disappeared. I was watching from the shadows. It happened on a Thursday. The boy was at school. The kettle had just started to hiss. I was folding laundry when I heard the knock. Not loud, hesitant, almost rehearsed. When I opened the door, they were both standing there. My daughter in a beige coat, her husband beside her like a shadow that had lost its form. Their smiles were forced, pulled tight like strings over a broken instrument. "Dad," she said, voice already quivering, "can we come in?" I didn't say yes. I simply stepped aside. The living room hadn't changed since they left. The cushions were the same. The air still smelled faintly of lavender and old wood. But something about the space felt heavier with them in it. Like betrayal had come home, wearing perfume and clean shoes. They sat on the edge of the couch, like guests afraid of judgment. She looked around, eyes tracing memories she had abandoned. He kept checking his phone like he was waiting for a rescue that wouldn't come. I didn't offer tea. I sat across from them, hands folded, eyes still. She started with the words she thought I needed to hear. "I've missed you. I've been thinking a lot about everything. He's growing up so fast. I feel like I'm missing out." I nodded, just enough to show I was present. Then came the tremble beneath the words. "We've been going through a difficult time," she added. Her eyes glanced sideways at her husband, then down to her hands, knotted in her lap. "There's been some confusion with the banks. Legal stuff, maybe misunderstandings. But it's temporary. Just need some stability." His voice jumped in, more direct. "It'd help if we could just look at the property deeds again. Maybe sort things out together, like a family should." Ah, there it was. Not guilt, not love. Need. They weren't here because they missed me. They were here because the walls were closing in, and I had the only door left unlocked. Still, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't confront. I let them speak. She cried a little, wiped her face with the same hands that once signed away my name. He made jokes, light ones, about tough times, about crazy lawyers, about how we should just sit down like we used to. But I didn't laugh. I watched their faces like an old man watches a fire die, not with sorrow, but with the knowledge that warmth is sometimes just illusion. When the silence grew heavy, I finally spoke. "How's your son?" I asked. That caught her breath. Her lips parted, but no words came. "He's doing well," I answered for them. "Better now." She looked down. He stood up, frustration twitching in his jaw. "We came here to make things right," he said. I looked at him the way stone looks at rain, unmoved. "No," I replied. "You came here because you thought I was still the same man you used to deceive." I let the silence bloom again. Let it sit between us. Like a judgment neither of us needed to say aloud. They didn't stay long after that. She touched my shoulder on her way out. I didn't flinch, but I didn't return it. When the door closed behind them, I didn't sigh. I didn't cry. I just stood still, listening to the fading sound of their footsteps on my porch. I listened, not to forgive, but to remember their tone. They came back 3 days later. This time, they brought pastries. I let them in without a word, gestured toward the table. The boy was away with a neighbor. I had arranged it that way. Some conversations shouldn't echo into innocent ears. The table was already set, not with tea or plates, but with papers, a neat stack of documents, photocopies, originals, a small voice recorder, a sealed envelope addressed to my lawyer. They sat, their eyes flickering over the items like gamblers at a losing table. I began, "We might go over a few things." Quietly, she smiled too quickly. "Of course, it's good to clear the air." I slid the first document across the table, bank statement. Withdrawals during the month I was in the hospital. Her signature. My account. Her smile faltered. The second, a notarized affidavit from the bank officer who confirmed forged power of attorney. "I don't remember this," she whispered. "Memory's tricky," I said softly, "but the paper remembers everything." Next came the voice recorder. I pressed play. Her husband's voice filled the room, casual, cruel, recorded from a conversation he'd had with someone else, unaware of the active line. He joked about the old man being half gone anyway, and how they'd fixed the paperwork before he noticed. He shifted in his seat. "That was taken out of context, I'm sure," I said, cutting in without raising my voice. I placed the property deed on the table next, circled dates, highlighted revisions, legal annotations from Layla, my friend, and now legal shield. Then the letter from my lawyer, still sealed, but the message was clear. This wasn't just about family anymore. This was about fraud. They sat frozen. My daughter stared at her hands like they no longer belonged to her. "I gave you everything," I said, not bitter, just tired. "And in return, you turned me into a signature, something to be forged. A stepping stone toward your version of comfort." "Dad, we didn't mean to." I held up a hand. "I'm not here for your guilt." I turned to her husband. "And I'm not here for your excuses." I stood, walking slowly toward the window. Rain had begun to fall again, light, steady, like truth washing the world clean. "When my wife died," I said, still facing away, "I thought the worst part was sleeping alone. I was wrong. The worst part was realizing I raised a daughter who could sleep knowing I was being stolen from by her and the man she brought home. Silence followed. No apology, just breathing, uneven and shallow. I turned back. "Now," I said, voice even, fingers resting lightly on the sealed envelope. "Let's discuss how you'll make things right." They didn't respond right away. They left that day with flushed cheeks and trembling hands, the envelope untouched. But the next morning, my lawyer called. "They want to settle quietly," Layla said, her voice unreadable. "They're offering full return of the misappropriated funds. No contest. No more court." "Good," I said. "But that's not enough, because I didn't want their money. I wanted accountability." We drafted an agreement, one that didn't just demand repayment, but required transparency. Every penny to be returned, documented, dated, witnessed, their names to be removed from any legal access to my property, bank accounts, and legacy. And one more clause. A written statement. An apology not sent to me, but to my grandson. A letter explaining what they did, why he was taken from that house, what truth was hidden behind locked doors and hollow lullabies. Layla warned me, "They won't like this part." "I'm not writing for their comfort," I replied. "I'm writing for his future." A week later, the documents were signed. Funds began to return in slow waves. They sold their car, downsized to a smaller place. He took on freelance work. My daughter, stopped posting online. I could feel their image collapsing even from a distance. Not ruined, no, but stripped of the polish they had worn like armor. At church, whispers swirled. People noticed. They stopped sitting in the front row. Someone mentioned a canceled anniversary party. Another said the husband was seen alone at the bank, speaking to a manager with red eyes and raised hands. They said nothing to me. Not a word. But one morning, a letter arrived. No stamp, just placed carefully in the mailbox. It was addressed to the boy. Inside, 2 pages, typed, not handwritten, but the words were hers. She admitted it all. The forging, the manipulation, the silence when he cried. She didn't beg for forgiveness, just wrote that she hoped one day you'll live without the shadows I cast. He didn't read it. Not yet. I folded it and placed it in a wooden box he'll open when he's older. When he's ready. When the past no longer stings, but teaches. That evening, I stood on the porch, watching the wind dance with fallen leaves. I wasn't angry. I wasn't proud. I was steady, because the truth had been acknowledged, not broadcasted, not screamed, not paraded. But signed, stamped, filed. I thought about the nights I stayed up, wondering where I went wrong, about the sacrifices that were never enough, the love that was seen as a resource, the silence that was mistaken for surrender. But this wasn't about revenge. This was about correction. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just stands tall and lets gravity do the rest. They would go on with their lives, altered, scarred, maybe even wiser, but they would never again hold the keys to mine and the boy. He would grow in light, not secrets. Mercy isn't free. Forgiveness has an invoice. They paid in silence, not money. The house is quiet now, not the kind of quiet that comes from loneliness, but the kind that follows a storm. That deep, breathing silence after everything that needed to fall has already fallen. It rained last night. The garden smells new, like soil, remembering how to breathe. The boy and I planted tulip bulbs 2 weeks ago. They haven't bloomed yet, but the green tips are breaking through, defiant, small, alive. Growth is like that. Quiet. Relentless. This morning, he went to school wearing a red scarf I knitted for him. He didn't know it used to be his mother's. He just said, "It smells like warm things." I didn't correct him. I walked through the house after he left. Not to check anything, just to feel it, the way it lives. Again, I dusted the photo frame on the mantel. My wife, frozen in a smile too wide for the paper to hold. She would have known what to say during all this. Or maybe she wouldn't have said anything at all. Just sat beside me the way she used to, letting silence hold the pain. Lit a candle in front of her picture. Not for mourning, but for memory. The letter still sits in the box. The one my daughter wrote to her son. I haven't opened it again. I won't. It's his to read one day, when he's grown enough to understand that sometimes, even those who love us the most can be the ones who forget what love really means. Out back, the bench under the fig tree is drier than usual. The rain didn't cling to it this time. I sat there this afternoon, watching the wind bend the branches, but not break them. I wonder if they think about me, her and the man she once called a husband. Do they wonder if I tell people what they did? Do they lie awake, waiting for the next consequence? Or has the silence become unbearable? I'll never know. And I don't need to. Closure isn't about erasing the wound, it's about no longer needing to explain the scar. I still cook 2 meals at night, one for him, one for me. But sometimes I leave a third plate out, just for a few seconds. Not for her. For the version of her that once held my hand with both of hers and said, "I'll never let go." Somewhere along the way, she did. But I didn't. I let go only when it was time. Not with rage. Not with fire, but with stillness that speaks louder than thunder. I take slow walks now, down to the old post box, through the lane lined with fig and flame trees. Neighbors nod. Some smile. One of them once asked, "You all right these days, Salman Bhai?" And I replied, truthfully, better than ever. Because I am. The boy sleeps without flinching now. The house doesn't creak from tension anymore. And I've learned that some victories don't feel like triumph. They feel like breathing again. Kindness is patience, sharpened to perfection.